My name is Tim Sheehan. Thank you guys for joining us today. I really appreciate spending some time with me to talk a little bit about cybersecurity and what that really means to the SMBs of the world. I manage the sales channels for the Americas for Webroot, now a Carbonite company. I've been with Webroot now for just over 15 years. So a long time. You can imagine in 15 years how many changes I've seen in the cybersecurity space, in the threat landscape alone, and how that we as a company had to adapt and change to that ever-changing threat landscape. And so that's kind of the theme that I want to go with today is this shift, this paradigm shift that we're talking about when it comes to cybersecurity and what SMBs think about it and how they approach it. Right? When you talk about breaches and cybersecurity attacks, the first things that come to mind are things like the Equifax breach or Facebook or Yahoo. They don't talk about the hundreds of thousands of small to medium businesses that are getting attacked each and every year and the impact that actually has on them. The Better Business Bureau did a study, they actually did a poll a year or so ago, and they interviewed a bunch of small to medium business, and they said, hey, if you had a complete breach, if you had some kind of cybersecurity attack and you had a complete breach of data, would you remain profitable? And only 1 out of every 3 companies said they would actually remain profitable. In a month's time, only half of those said they would still remain profitable. So you can see that cybersecurity is becoming more of a cost of business. It's something that we're going to have to, it's not something that's going to be on the back burner, it's going to have to be more on the forefront of our minds. We have to start making strategies around cybersecurity because it's not just about the success of our businesses, sometimes it's about survival. And I'll start by telling a quick story. How many people out here are skiers? All right, we've got some good skiers out there. I'm a big skier. I actually moved from Chicago to Denver about 20 years ago with the hopes I can get on the mountains as much as I can. But man, like skiing it's expensive sport, is it not? It's crazy expensive. Like you're talking about airfare, you're talking about lift tickets, and when it comes down to it, you're spending a lot of money. All right, so if you're taking your spouse and 2 kids on a trip, in this case, this is a true story, to a ski resort in Central Oregon, you're putting a lot of effort into it, a lot of money. So you're spending money on airline tickets in prime ski season. You are spending money on lodging in prime ski season. You've got equipment, you've got gear, you've got rentals, maybe lessons, food. Anybody ever bought food in a ski resort? I hope you like that $15 hamburger. It's expensive, right? It's super expensive, but it's not something that you can do at the last minute either. This is not something that you can say, hey, let's go to the beach this weekend, honey. This is something you have to put a little forethought into. This is maybe 4 months of planning. You want to go out there and maybe 6 months ahead of time. And so you've done all this. You've done all this preparation. You've done all this work. You spent all this money. And you go to that ski resort in Central Oregon, and you land. The next morning, it's a beautiful day. You just had 6 inches of fresh powder fall. And you get up early, get all the kids all ready to go, and you get in line to buy your lift tickets at the ticket office. Okay, now let's shift the story from you to the real-life individual that was working as the IT pro lead at that ski resort that day. So he walks in. It's a beautiful day. They just had 6 inches of fresh powder. It's going to be an awesome day. They're going to make a lot of money today. It's beautiful sunny weather. He gets his coffee, checks his email, checks his voicemail, checks his tickets. Not a lot's going on. Then a phone call comes in. And it's one of the employees at the ski resort. And she has a problem. And then another phone call, and another phone call, and another phone call, and so on and so on. And he quickly realizes there's some kind of problem that's going on. And so the first thing he does is he remotes into that machine, and one of the user's machines, and lo and behold, the first thing he sees is that infamous splash screen that says, oops, your files have been encrypted. hit this link to pay X amount of Bitcoin, and we'll release those files back to you. And so now they know they have a big problem. They're like, okay. And they start doing all the right things. The infections are happening on 2 networks. They isolate those networks from the rest of the networks out there. And so they isolate them. But unfortunately, one of those networks that got infected was attached to their POS devices. So lift tickets, rentals, food, all the gear and merchandise that you want to buy is now all offline. And they're completely scrambling. They don't know what to do, so they're trying to set up temporary POS systems in place. But ultimately, the day starts to go downhill very quickly. On top of that, they just incorporated a new backup system that they hadn't tested in just this kind of incident. So they hadn't tested to see if it would actually work. The day is pure misery for them. They end up only making less than 10% of what they would normally make on any given ski day. So doing their post-mortem, at the end of the day, they start to realize that this came from one of their employees got a phishing email and clicked on a link. And that link obviously got the infection started, got it rolling, and that started the mayhem that ensued. And so they started to take a step back and said, wow, maybe we need to rethink our strategy around cybersecurity. Maybe endpoint security and a firewall is just not good enough. And so they started to think about other layers of protection, like protection at the network level, so DNS protection. So they incorporated that. And they realized that one of the failures was not technology, was human. They had a human error, which was an uneducated individual. And when I say uneducated, not educated on the savviness of what a phishing email might look like. And so they realized that they might have to incorporate things like security awareness training. So a massive hit to revenue for that day. But now go back to you standing in line with your family. You got your 2 kids there ready to ski. Your spouse is there. You're ready to go. And you're sitting in a long line with hundreds of people, and you can't get a ticket because all you know is there's some kind of technology issues not printing out tickets, and you have no idea why. And so maybe your ski trip was only, 2 or 3 days, and now you've got 1 day that's already gone. Now, next time when you plan your ski trip, are you going to go to that ski resort in Central Oregon? Unlikely. I wouldn't. I'm not going back there. There's a trust issue. So now you have to repair brand. And so you have a lot of loyal customers that go there as well on a regular basis. They're a bit distrustful. You got people that have never been there before. They may never go there again. Those repairs might take months to years. That's the impact. I don't like to talk about failures. This is actually a happy ending. That the company, the resort is still in business and still doing very well. But there's a lot of businesses that don't end up with that same kind of story. So we're going to talk about the realities today, what you guys are seeing with cybersecurity, what the needs and requirements are for an SMB, what's really critical, and what are some of the best practices. And I understand a lot of the best practices you guys are going to say I've seen before, I incorporate. So a lot of this is going to be some reminders for you. But why are SMBs the target? Well, they're the lifeblood of the United States, all the business in the United States. 99% of businesses in the U.S. and the world are SMBs. You can pretty much shoot an arrow up in the sky of a herd of buffalo, and you're likely to hit one of them. So 2 out of every 3 jobs that's created each and every year is an SMB. And SMBs they're distracted. They're not thinking about cybersecurity. That's not in the forefront of their mind. They're trying to get a business off the ground. They're trying to grow their business. They're trying to make a buck. That's why we see the majority of business owners actually manage multiple business segments. They got their hands in everything. Security is not typically one of them. But we are seeing some shining bright spots in all this as well. We're starting to see the adoption of artificial intelligence when it comes to cybersecurity around SMBs. What that means, why is artificial intelligence important? It's because we're starting to see the savviness of SMBs saying, hey, we know the threat landscape is evolving. We know that we need the best protection out there. We know that we need artificial intelligence to identify threats as they're coming up. and to do a better job of prevention and blocking. But the war is on. It is on, and it's on you guys. When I was doing this presentation, or a similar presentation, only a few years ago, I can remember talking about, hey, half of the ransomware attacks that we're seeing today are enterprise, half of them are on SMBs, and that has definitely shifted. We've now seen everything moving towards SMBs because they believe that you guys are easier pickings. You guys are easier targets. You have less layers of defense. Cybersecurity is not what you're thinking about most often. That's why we're seeing about 67% of business already reporting they've already had an attack. About 58% are saying they've already had some kind of major data breach, SMBs. Just 2 years ago, I remember reading the article, they were talking about ransomware, and they said, hey, ransomware is just tipping over into now $1 billion business. That was just 2 years ago. Now it's an $8 billion business. And the breaches that we're seeing that in the small to medium business world, the vast majority of those breaches aren't seen for months. 56% of those they don't see for months. They don't even identify they even exist. SMBs, you guys are the new targets. You guys are the ones that they're gunning for. You guys have bullseyes on your backs. And it doesn't really matter what size you are. We're seeing exposure at all levels. So, and where we're seeing some of the big increases are at the smaller guys, right? Between 1 to 249 employees. That's where we're seeing the biggest increase year over year. They figured that they go further down hill, the more they're gonna find holes and gaps that they can. That's their belief, at least, that they can expose. So what's the answer? Well, let's throw money at it. Money fixes everything, right? Yes and no. So Forrester did this report and for small to medium businesses, and they had different buckets of people on how much percentage of their budget they spent on cybersecurity. And they quickly realized that there wasn't a lot of difference between the guys who spent more and the guys who spent less. And it's partly because we don't do one of the first rules when it comes to security, is we don't self-assess. We're not looking at ourselves. We're not looking at what our risks are, where our gaps are, what the holes are, what our priorities are. And so we're just fixing holes, right? We see something come up and we're spending money here. We see something here, we're spending money here. And so we're just stopgap measures. 64% of SMBs who actually do spend 10% of their budget still experience at least one breach. But we are starting to see some differences in the maturity of the market as far as cybersecurity. What we're seeing is that there is a savviness, there is people paying more attention to cybersecurity because they understand that there is a part of that is success in the growth of their company, and part of it's survival, and that companies that spend 10% or more of their budget on cybersecurity are starting to be seen as a bit more cybersecurity mature. But they're looking for efficacy and simplicity, and so they're looking for things like platforms, things that can provide multiple layers of protection in an easy to manage solution that's effective. And the need for multiple layers of protection, endpoint and firewall protection may not be enough anymore. For the first time ever this past year, we actually saw cybersecurity service spending actually surpass cybersecurity hardware and software. So that talks to the cybersecurity awareness that we're starting to see, that savviness, that they're starting to put money in the right places. So Forrester again went out there and started saying, hey, let's take a look to see what level of cybersecurity awareness the SMBs are at right now. What do they want to buy? And so we see some really good things here, even in the lower to mid buckets, spending buckets. We're seeing things like strategies around building security around stuff they're hosting in the cloud. And they're talking about educating the end users, knowing that that's probably one of their weakest links. And then when you start to spend more, when you get up to that next bucket, that highest bucket, you're starting to look at bigger picture items, things like cybersecurity insurance policies. And we're also starting to see those guys who are spending a little bit more money, they're also evaluating the security requirements of the third-party vendors that they're working with. That's kind of relevant today with the news we're seeing today, right? We're seeing small to medium businesses who might think they're secure, but because of poor cyber hygiene from the third-party folks that they're working with that have access to their infrastructure, they're getting exposed and they're getting compromised. And so how do they hold those third-party vendors responsible? Well, we know what small to medium business want to buy. What is it they actually buy? Well, they buy the things that scare them the most, right? Like ransomware. Ransomware scares companies. Like it scared that ski resort for sure. You know, they want to make sure that you get a ransomware infection, well, I've got a backup, and I also have a good solid endpoint solution as well. And then they start looking at more holistically on all the multiple layers of security around network monitoring services, seeing what's going on in their infrastructure, securing their channels through VPN, patch management. Still today, one of the biggest exposures we've got is not keeping machines up to date. But I'm happy to see that things like security awareness training is about 50% now, because people are starting to realize now that is our actual weakest link. But you have to take a step back and again, identify what's really essential to you. Every business is unique. Every business is going to have different data. They're going to have different risks, the different holes to fill. And so when you have different risks, you're going to have to do that self-assessment. You're going to have to say, hey, what are my priorities? Where do I need to spend the money? I don't have an unlimited budget. And there's this operational reality check that we have to do. We have this, if we had all the money in the world, that'd be great. We'd be the most secure small and medium businesses out there, but we don't. We have a restricted budget we have to work with. And we have to get solutions that are easy to manage, that are affordable, that we don't have to work with 1,000 different vendors on because, again, I don't have maybe a whole security team to manage this. But it's that paradigm shift that we talked about, that mindset shift where IT security is no longer an insurance policy. Now, successful SMBs are looking at this as a cost of doing business, a cost of being successful, a cost of growing my business. And believe it or not, it's actually not as complex as you think it is to build a secure environment. And we'll talk about best practices in a bit, but there's really 3 main rules when it comes to creating a very secure infrastructure. And the first one is the one that I think most people miss, is doing that audit, that self-audit, that self-assessment. Where are my risks? What are the gaps that I have? Where's my data? What's my access to all my users? What do they have access to? And then you have to build that prioritization to make sure that, again, we don't have a lot of money to spend, so we have to make sure that we're prioritizing all the defenses that we need to fill the gaps that we know are our biggest exposures out there. That's where we're going to spend our money. And then incorporate best practices, documented, consistent, always updated procedures, and follow them stringently. We talk about patch management earlier. Patch management that's a best practice, and yet we still have a massive exposure out there for unpatched machines. If you're following that purple bubble, your machines are completely patched. What we're seeing is that platforms is the direction that most small to medium businesses are going for a few reasons. One, when you start to incorporate platforms that have multiple layers of security in it, you're getting security that fills in the gaps between. There's built-in security expertise where these different layers can start to talk to each other and start to automate some of that process, some of that security process, so you guys can work on other things. But let's be honest, having a platform that hosts multiple solutions is simpler to manage, it's unified, and it's going to be typically more affordable than not having a unified platform. So let's go into some of the best practices. And I know, you guys, that some of this stuff is obvious stuff, but if you guys gain one piece of information off this, I'd be pretty happy. So before we go into some of the bigger ones, let's talk about just some of the themes that we're seeing in good practices versus some of the bad practices. And one of the most important things to drive a secure environment is to get that executive buy-in, because that's gonna everything else is gonna fall into place once you get that executive buy-in. You're gonna start to create that cybersecurity culture where you can start to build strategies, and you can get heads of teams. You can start building some of those processes, and you start thinking about creating cyber security awareness for my employees. Versus the companies who are more exposed are dealing with security more on an ad hoc basis. And there's not really any clear line of responsibility. There's no strategies in place. There's not really a aligned budget, or maybe if there's a budget, it's very limited. And ultimately very slow to respond to incidences that are happening. First and foremost, best practices, use a reputable, proven multi-vector protection endpoint security solution. Obviously, everyone's got one, or they think they do. The one thing the one word, or the multiple words I guess I'd hone in on, is the multiple vector protection piece. And what do I mean by multiple vector protection? It's a convoluted term now, and it's very polluted. I don't think anyone knows specifically what it means anymore. But I'll kind of see if I can simplify it for you. So when you're looking at an endpoint security solution that has multi-vector protection, well, I guess let's describe the ones that don't. When there's tons of solutions, the vast majority of endpoint security solutions out there are very black and white in their approach, right? They're putting their horse blinders on. All they're doing, and whether it's the old guys, the signature-based guys, or the new guys leveraging machine learning and artificial intelligence, they have their horse blinders on, and all they're doing is looking at that file, and they're saying, hey, that file just got entered into this machine. Is this a good file, or is this a bad file? And it's black and white. If they get it, great. If they don't, they miss it, infection. A multi-vector protection strategy looks at infections more holistically. They look at infections as a process built of stages. And all along those stages are opportunities to leverage either different parts of intelligence or different technologies to either block, remediate, or prevent infections from happening. So things like, here's an example. So you get an infection that comes in, it actually got missed, and then it's just an agent that's going to go reach out to its command and control server. But that command and control server is actually hosted on an IP address that has been identified as a bad IP address. So in multi-vector protection approach, there's other intelligence pieces that are being involved in the process. So now an endpoint solution that says, hey, I have IP reputation. I know that this software, I don't know if it's good or bad, I guess I missed it, is trying to communicate out to this bad site. Well, I'm going to block that communication so it can't download anything else. Again, that prevention piece. Or things like real-time anti-phishing, where you're leveraging machine learning and artificial intelligence. If someone gets an email, one of your employees gets an email, a phishing email, and they click on that link, the first thing that it's going to do is jump ahead and pre-scan that site and say, hey, this might look like Netflix, but I know it's not Netflix. And so it's going to, again, block that user from going there. That's the multi-vector strategy. That's making sure that you have intelligence and technologies at both pre-execution and post-execution to make sure that you're trying to keep that data and your users safe. Back up your data. You had to put this one up there. Everyone knows it. Everyone does it, right? Of course. Everyone says that they do. That's right. So, and you don't have to show your hands here because we don't call you out. But how many people have gotten notifications that they've gotten a failed backup in a day? I see people they raise their hands and let it go. Like I'll address that tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day. And a couple weeks go by, and now you're a little exposed, right? Like that happens to we are IT professionals. We have a lot on our plate. I'll get to it. Right, so making sure that we're monitoring that and addressing those backups, but we're also testing it as well, making sure that the data is actually recoverable. Because the last thing, when you see this screen pop up on one of your users' machines, your backup is pretty much your last recourse at that point. It is one of the older ones, yeah. It's bad that you know that. So let's talk briefly about the weakest link that's out there today, which is the human. As long as we're involved in technology, we're going to make mistakes, we're going to screw up, we're going to have to get educated. And guess what? Your employees are getting attacked from every medium, every vector that's out there at this point. And man, the bad actors out there are getting super, super creative. They're trying several different ways to get the attention of your employee. Whether it's the CEO fraud whaling, where they're getting an email from their CEO saying, hey, I need to get this wire transfer over to this customer right away. And they have that set of urgency. And people are like, oh, my job's at stake. But there is no shortage of phishing attempts. And let's face it, this isn't going to go anywhere. The operating systems that we're seeing today, they are getting more secure. Whether you're a Microsoft fan or not, Windows 10 is absolutely more secure than Windows 7. Right? It's a proven fact. I'm not stating anything that we don't know. So they're going to have to find ways for people to open the doors for them. That's where the social engineering attacks, the phishing attacks are going to continue to increase. And phishing is of course, still super, super successful. 90% of the breaches that we're still seeing today are due to some kind of human interaction. Someone screwed something up. Someone did something they weren't supposed to. 91% of the cyber attacks start with some kind of phishing email. It works, so they're going to continue to do it. But educating users, doing phishing simulations and things like that, cybersecurity training is not just to help you protect your business. It's now a regulation. So the compliance regulations that one of yours might be up here that you might be held to, and the language that we're seeing in some of this compliance regulations, years ago was pretty vague. Now they're actually calling it out very, very specifically that you actually need to start now with a security awareness training. This one's a tricky one, disabling execution of script files. Every company's different. If you're getting emails and you don't need to be able to run execution of scripts, you can just stop it. Because that's where a lot of the infections are happening. Disabling VBS, disabling macro executions, preventing users from running PowerShell. But that's an individual basis. I understand that there's a need for that. Patching machines. We know how important this is. We know this is where a lot of the infections are coming in. You guys remember Eternal Blue? This is a great story because it's still a massive problem. You guys remember the story about Eternal Blue, right? So the NSA had this secret exploit that they kept to use for whatever nefarious reasons they wanted to use it for. I don't know, but they got hacked. The NSA got hacked, and by a group called the Shadow Brokers. And the Shadow Brokers took that exploit and they released it on the wild. And they released it on the wild a month after the patch was out. A month after that, what happened? WannaCry. Yeah, WannaCry came out. And that hit hundreds of thousands of machines on unpatched machines. And then a month after that, then what happened? It was a month or two after that. NotPetya came out. Same exact exploit, just on unpatched machines. That's the importance of obviously making sure machines are patched. The This one's a big one, remote desktop access. So I like to sit with my support team every once in a while just to see what our customers are saying, some of the issues they're having. And if I get like I hear someone say, "Hey, we got infected with a ransomware," I'm like, "Whoa, hang on, did our endpoint security solution not block it?" And 9 times out of 10, what I'm hearing is that there's some kind of remote desktop access (RDP) exposure that happened either through a brute force attack, what have you. And once you get in, that doesn't matter what endpoint security solution you have. It doesn't matter what security solutions you have in general. Now you have admin rights into that infrastructure, and you can disable whatever you want. And that is a massive problem. Rapid7 did a internet-wide scan a couple of years ago, and they found over 11 million devices with 3389 ports left open online. Over 4 million of them were already speaking the RDP protocol. So a big problem, and this is where we're seeing potentially that poor cyber hygiene. You know, when you're trying to lock down your environment and you're working with a third-party company who has access to your infrastructure, do they have all their stuff locked down? That's something that is going to be something we're going to have to worry about. One of the things that Webroot saw a couple years ago was that RDP is now higher on the totem pole, the spectrum of delivering ransomware than spam campaigns. And if you think that your ports are open and you're worried about brute force attacks, don't worry about brute force attacks. Your ports are already for sale on the dark web. So that's actually a legitimate site. You can go out there and buy access to these exposed ports out there and do whatever mayhem you'd like. Some more best practices. Beyond endpoint protection, you got to start thinking about other threat detection systems, maybe budget permitting EDR solutions. So you can find out what's happening in your infrastructure. Obviously, correctly leveraging group policies so you can limit access to users within their infrastructure and where they're going. Restore points. An interesting one was providing visibility of file extensions. I actually was thinking about this with my dad. I'm like, would my dad click on a file if it had a .exe versus a .doc? I think he would think twice about a .exe. So providing that your employees are a bit more savvy than you might give them credit for sometimes. So provide that extension visibility. Create a segmented network access infrastructure where users don't have access to everything and data is spread across those different segments. Of course, the strong password enforcement, that goes without saying. It's literally where all these RDP brute force attacks are coming from, is people aren't changing default passwords. It still happens on a regular basis, or they're not using very complex passwords. But we are here to help. Now that Webroot and Carbonite have combined, we have all the solutions to be able to help in many of the things that we talked about. Getting that unified platform with our award-winning business endpoint security solution, that multi-vector protection that leverages machine learning and artificial intelligence to be able to protect at the network level as well with our DNS protection, and also to train your end users to be a bit more cybersecurity aware through security awareness training. Again, all in one single platform. And then on the data protection side, we've got file and endpoint protection, backup and recovery, Office 365, and we also have tools for migration as well. So now that the top two things that everyone was worried about when what people are buying, now you actually have one vendor. That was it. I told you it wasn't going to be an hour. So does anybody have any questions that they'd like to shoot? Well, I guess we got a microphone that's going to come your direction.
Hello. Is it on? Okay. You've covered a lot of layers of security for protection, but the one thing I didn't hear in your presentation I wanted to get your thoughts on was application whitelisting as a method for securing your domain.
Application whitelisting is one of the best ways to do it if you have the ability to take that control. That's a tough one because it's a lot of work that IT professionals don't have a lot of time for. So time permitting, yeah, it's a fantastic measure.
Correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't that require Windows Enterprise versions typically instead of Pro?
No.
It's not.
No, you can use software restriction policy.
Hi, Tim.
Hi.
My name is Pat, and thanks for
Hi,
putting
Pat.
the presentation on.
Sure.
I have a question. So we're a really tiny shop. We have probably more servers than we have employees, and because we have such a small budget, we use a lot of freeware. So most of my shop is kind of a mix of Linux and Windows systems. So it's really hard to try and find a solution that will do like everything on all of the systems. So in terms of having a budget to spend for two separate kind of different things, what would you recommend for a small shop where we're kind of mixed and I can't really use GPOs and we're a development system shop, so we need local admin and it's just a nightmare waiting to happen for me?
Yeah, I don't know if I have the complete answer for you, to be honest. I mean, that goes back to that assessment, right, where you're going to have to find out where your biggest gaps are. Because if you don't put the money towards filling those gaps, and I realize that you have different pieces to fill, but like you're going to have to take a leap at some point and start putting money in all parts if that's where your exposure's at.
Doing a lot of user education and just trying to make sure that they're not going to click on things because I think
Right.
that's probably going to be the biggest problem.
So that's that piece where you got to start prioritizing where the gaps are. If that's one of the biggest gaps that you think you have your exposure at, then that becomes a priority. But if you've got unprotected Linux systems and things like that, that you've got. Everyone thinks they're okay.
One thing that we ran into recently is mobile device management. We're sitting through a little roundtable discussion and had a couple auditors, CEOs all in the room. And we talked about all these layers of approaches we did, diversification of those layers, not counting on one product. But then they got to mobile device management, and the CEO goes, well, we have no mobile remote employees, so we don't have to worry about that. And I immediately was like, well, you have email on your phone, and that all the auditors step up. And, I mean, within seconds, we found out he didn't even have a passcode on his phone. So
Yeah,
that's just one of those pitfalls. How do you feel about, and this goes back to my question, while we were working on diversification, a lot of our consultants weren't even touching that, but we had to get in about 3 or 4 different consultants in, and one of them finally mentioned, why are you not doing this? So
why are your remote pieces exposed?
It's like, don't put all your security into one basket and rely on just one company, or can you?
Yeah, based on the prioritizations that you have and where the gaps are, you're likely not going to find one vendor to fill all the holes. And again, if remote device management is one of the gaps you have to fill, you may not find a vendor that can do that plus, endpoint security or backup. That's where you're not going to be able to find one vendor to do it all. But for simplification purposes, some of the security platforms, when you're looking at that holistic approach, you're trying to do as much as you can with as little overhead and little management that is required, I suppose. So that's where the platform's going to play.
Do you think you could build way too much into that?
I don't think anyone has yet.
Question. For as much we tell the users, train them on the phishing links and all that,
Yeah.
it still happens. Do you have a solution where we can whitelist and say you can only enter passwords here, like in Office 365, wherever points to the internet, instead of training them, because that doesn't work very well?
So can you repeat that one?
Yeah, do you have a solution where we can say you can only enter passwords, like for example in Office 365, any systems that point to the internet?
Does Weber Carbonite have a solution? We do not have a solution for that.
Because some of the vendors, what they're talking today, for example, I've been talking to Palo Alto, some other ones, they're saying we have a solution. I forget what they call it. It's credentials compromise or something, where you can go whitelist all the domains where they can a user enter external passwords and domains.
I see. Yeah.
Do you have something similar for that?
I like no. We don't have that, but I do like that approach because that is an exposure that's out there.
For as much as the first group, I told them not to do it. You know, we gave them the training. They were the first ones that did it. So, I mean, training
it doesn't
work.
It does. The awareness training does work in some of the stats that we're seeing, and that's a kind of a unique scenario. But when it comes to like phishing attacks and things like that, we do have stats on it. It does work. We're seeing that if employees get trained on a regular, consistent basis, like typically about once a month for a period of about 12 months, there is a 70% decline in click-throughs. They're become very, very paranoid on making sure that they're doing the right things. So, all right, well, it looks like we do have a gigantic booth out there. So if anyone has any follow-up questions about the technologies, about security, about data protection, feel free to stop by. I'm going to do where's the fishbowl? Oh, there it is.